Hi there, my name is Bill Graham. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Barry Harris's Sixth Diminished system. For those of you who don't know, the Sixth Diminished system is a concept that Barry developed to talk about and generate movement in between the main chords of a song. He always says that he doesn't play chords, he plays movements. So we're going to talk about what the Sixth Diminished scale is in the first place, and then we're going to talk about how we apply the Sixth Diminished scale to different chord qualities, and then we're going to also take a look at how we apply the whole system to a tune. So let's start off with just talking about what the Sixth Diminished scale is. All it is a scale that's made up of a major sixth chord, so like in the key of C, a C6, that's C, E, G, and A, and then the diminished seventh chord that happens on the seventh degree of that scale. So in this case, it's B diminished 7. That's B, D, F, and A flat. So if we put that whole scale together, there we go. It looks like a major scale with an extra note in between the 5th and 6th degree. Now, we don't really play that as a scale, just up and down. The point of that is harmony. So we're going to harmonize that scale with alternating inversions of the C6 and the B diminished. So let's say we've got a C in the melody. Let's just fill in a C6th under it. Okay, cool. Let's go up to the next scale degree, and we're going to fill in a B diminished chord under that. And now we're going to go up to the next inversion of C6th, B diminished, C6, B diminished, C6, B diminished, and then we're back up at C6th. So the whole point of this scale is to have this constant movement going back and forth between tonic and dominant, right? So one more time. All right, so first of all, you got to have that together. But then Barry talks about borrowing diminished notes. So what he means by that is when we're on the C6, all right, the diminished chord that it's related to, B diminished, we can take any voice of that chord and move whatever note it's playing up to the closest note from that diminished chord, right? So if we take this C6, take our top note, and we borrow a note from B diminished, that's a B, right? So that makes us a C major 7 chord. And listen to how nice a movement that is. That 7th wants to fall down to the 6th. Let's see what happens if we do that in two voices. So the top voice is going to, that's normally on A, is going to borrow a B. And then the voice that's on G, we're going to borrow A flat. Okay? Now that's pretty. That's a major 7 sharp 5 chord. And here it resolves back into that 6th chord, right? How about if we borrow 3 voices? So we're going to, the voice that was playing the 3rd is going to come up to a diminished note too. Okay, that's interesting. And again, it resolves. We could even take all 4 voices. Let's put the C in the bass now, and in the upper voices, borrow all 4 notes from the diminished chord, and then it resolves down. All right, that's nice. The whole point of these diminished notes is that they're moving lines, right? Barry says that any of these diminished notes, they're just calling out, move me. They want to get moved down into the next chord, right? So let's try doing that concept for the whole scale, right? We could do borrowing 1 note, Okay, that's real nice. How about borrow 2 notes on each chord? Again, some very pretty sounds. How about 3 notes on each chord? Or, again, even all 4 notes. Okay, so lots of real pretty sounds, right? We can also do this with a minor 6th chord. So let's try C minor 6th diminished. So that scale is a C minor 6th chord and a B diminished chord. So okay, we can do all those same borrowed notes, right? All this. Right, so that's like playing our C minor 6 chord, and we're borrowing 2 diminished notes. What's this? This is a C minor major 9 chord, right? So we all play this chord, but we don't really know where to go with it, right? But if you play that chord and then resolve it, now that's a pretty thing to play, okay? Let's try playing all those borrowed note combinations on the C minor 6th diminished scale. Okay, so borrowing 1 note. Okay, let's borrow 2 notes. All right, how about 3 notes? Or we could, of course, borrow the whole chord. Okay, great. So now that we know about the major sixth diminished scale and the minor sixth diminished scale, now we can start talking about how to apply those scales to all the different chord qualities and different chord functions. So let's say we're in the key of C and we're playing just on a C chord. We're playing on the 1 chord. So it's C sixth or C major 7, C6, whatever. It's the 1 chord. So our first option to think about is playing our C6 diminished scale of chords. Okay, cool. So the other thing that Barry talks a lot about is playing what he calls the 6th on the 5th. Okay, so if we're in C, the 5th is G. So he's talking about playing a G6th chord over the C in the bass, right? So it's really a C chord, but he's putting a G6 over top of it. Okay, that gives us a C major 9 kind of sound. And that can move back and forth between the 6th on the 1. Right? But we could also play the whole scale of chords, the whole G6th diminished scale of chords over it. So let's try that a little bit. Okay, so that's nice. That diminished chord that we get in that G6th scale of chords is an F sharp diminished 7th chord. But because every diminished 7th chord is actually 4 different diminished 7th chords, we could call this F sharp diminished 7th, sure. We could also call it A diminished 7th, or E flat diminished 7th, or C diminished 7th. And since we're in the key of C, it probably makes the most sense to think about it as a C diminished. So if we're thinking about a C diminished 7th chord in the key of C, that's what we call a tonic diminished or a common tone diminished chord. Because it's like you take your C6th chord and just move 2 voices down to turn it into our C diminished chord. So C diminished can lead to C6th, the 6th on the 1, or it can lead into G6th, which is our 6th on the 5th. Okay, so that's all pretty nice. Also, though, lead from that G6th, the 6th on the 5th, to a G diminished 7th to take us back to C6th. So now that's a couple of different moves we've got, right? We could say C6th to C diminished to G6th all over the C, right? Or we could say G6th to G diminished to C6th. Okay? So we said, or either one of those is real nice. Okay, so that's what we think about on the 1 chord. Okay, so now let's talk about what you're going to play on a minor 7th chord, like on a 2 chord. So let's say we're playing C minor 7. So Barry says not to think about minor 7th chords, that minor 7th chords are really just 6th chords with the 6th in the bass. So he would say this isn't C minor 7, it's actually E flat 6th. So all you got to do is anytime you have a minor 7th chord, think about the relative major of that minor. So C minor, the relative major is E flat major. Or just think about the third of the chord. We're going to play a major 6th chord, and then think about the major 6th scale of chords. So on C minor 7, we can think E flat 6th. Okay, Cool. And the fifth of E flat is B flat. So we can play B flat sixth to take us to E flat sixth. Right, so we can play even just those two chords like that. Nice little moving line on the inside there. We could also play the B flat sixth scale of chords, right? So now that's, again, going to be a C diminished taking us into that E flat sixth. We got that common tone diminished. Some more nice little movements we can play. Okay, great. Let's talk now about what we're going to play on a dominant seventh chord. So on a 5 chord. Let's say we're on C7. So on C7, the fifth is, again, G. So we're going to think a G minor sixth diminished. We're going to think the minor sixth diminished scale that's on the fifth of the chord. So for C7, we're going to play G minor sixth diminished. Okay, so G minor 6, and then the scale of chords, we've got F sharp diminished, which we could think of as C diminished, again, because that's a common tone diminished chord here. G minor 6. Okay, so that gives us a dominant ninth kind of sound, right? Because this D is the ninth of the chord. All the other notes are just plain old C7 notes. So we can borrow a diminished note, or 2 diminished notes, or 3 or 4 diminished notes, just like we could on the major sixth diminished scale. So let's try that. Let's say we're on this C7 chord. Let's borrow 1 note in the top voice and then resolve it back down. So if we're on G minor 6, we're going to borrow F sharp from that F sharp diminished chord. Okay, so that was nice, right? That in the key of C, we're going to have to call that the sharp 11 or the flat 5, right? But we're not thinking about Lydian dominant or any kind of fancy mode names. We're just thinking about these 6 chords and these diminished chords, and borrowing 1 note or borrowing 2 notes, that's real pretty, right? Because that's going to resolve down like that. How about 3 notes? Or all 4? These are nice sounds, right? So anyway, try that on the whole scale. Our other option on a dominant chord is to play the minor 6 diminished scale of chords that is on the flat 2. So that would mean if we're on C7, we're going to think D flat minor 6th diminished. So that gives us a more altered kind of sound, right? So we've got the flat 9th. Let's put in a different inversion. We've got the flat 9th, we've got the 3rd, and we've got the sharp 5th or flat 13, right? Let's take this through the scale of chords. And so obviously this is a really tense kind of sound that needs to resolve. It's a 5 chord after all. You don't want to just hang out there all day. It does need to resolve. But we get all those same pretty alterations in there. Going ahead and play through the whole scale, borrowing 1 note, 2 note, 3 notes, 4 notes, just like we were doing before on the other chord qualities. One other option that you can think about on a dominant chord is just think about what key you're in. So if we're in the key of C and there's a G7 chord, okay, well let's just keep thinking our C 6th diminished scale of chords. Okay, so let's say we're on a G7 and there's a D in the melody. Okay, well let's harmonize that with that B diminished chord and put a G in the bass Okay, now this is G7 flat 9. So that's great. What if we borrow a sixth note? Let's say we take our top voice and we borrow E from our C sixth. Okay, well now this is a G13 flat 9. But it doesn't matter. We don't need to call it that. We just take our chord and we borrow a diminished note, or maybe we borrow 2 diminished notes over it. Or what about 3? Okay, now this is a 13 sus chord. We use this all the time, right? And we even play that little movement all the time. But I don't know that everyone really understands what you're doing when you make that little movement. So all that's happening is we're in the key of C, right? And we're actually borrowing 3 sixth notes to bring back down to our diminished chord. And then it'll resolve back down to our 1. Or we can do any of those little movements that was going to a tonic diminished and then resolving it back up into C6, right? Or what if we said F diminished to go into C in the bass, G diminished to G6th, and then back down into C6th. So see, there are all kinds of real nice little movements that we can make. Just mess around with it. Now, let's talk about what we play on a minor sixth chord. This is easy. When you're on a tonic minor chord, so a minor sixth or a minor major 7, all you got to think is the minor 6 diminished scale that's on the 1 there. So if we're on C minor 6, right? And we already practiced borrowing notes in this minor 6 diminished scale. Okay, so the only one really left to talk about is the minor 7 flat 5. So just like minor 7th chords, Barry says that minor 7 flat 5 chords don't really exist. They're just a minor 6th chord with the 6th in the bass. Okay? So like, let's say that we had a D minor 7 flat 5. So Barry would say that D minor 7 flat 5 is really just F minor 6th that happens to have the 6th in the bass. So when you see a D minor 7 flat 5, you're going to think the F minor 6th diminished scale of chords. Okay, so we're going to think. So all you got to do is think, all right, D minor 7 flat 5, so the third of that is F, and you just think a minor 6th diminished on the third of the chord. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about what to think on each different chord quality, let's try putting it all together and applying it to a tune. Since we're in the middle of the holiday season, I thought it might be nice to try applying this stuff on Irving Berlin's tune, White Christmas. All right, so this is a really simple song, but there are a couple things in the melody that really let us take advantage of some of this 6 diminished stuff. So let's go over just the basic chord changes and melody first. We're going to play it in the key of C. So it's going to start off on a C6, so we're on the 1 chord, to D minor 7, to G7. I'm just going to play simple block chords for right now. D minor 7, 2, to 5, back to 1. Got a little 2-5 to turn around, leading to 5 of 4, to 4, minor 4, 1, 6, 2, 5, back to 1. This is just like the beginning. One to 5 of 4, to 4, and minor 4. Again, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay, so you saw how much chromatic kind of zigzagging around is happening in that melody, right? So that really gives us a nice opportunity to put a different chord on every one of those melody notes. So So we're on C. We've got the third in the melody. So we're going to play a C6. And watch this. We're going to go up to a B diminished, back to C6, and then we're going to go to C diminished because we've got this D sharp or E flat in the melody. I'm going to call it D sharp because it leads back up to the E, right? So we can play, that's C diminished 7 to C6. So from the top here, we've got C6, D diminished, C6, C diminished, C6. All right, and then check this out. D minor 7, so we're just going to think F6. And then this is something kind of interesting. So we've got a G7. Right, we've got a G7, but it starts off with this F sharp in the melody. And, boy, that really doesn't work. But watch what happens if we put a diminished chord under that. So now we've got a C diminished, and we can lead it to a G6, how about? And that's real nice. Okay, so from the top now, we're thinking, okay, so what are we going to play over this D minor 7 chord?
Okay, cool.
The melody goes, okay, so 2 of those are chord tones. So we can just play the simple F6 chord over it. But the note in between, normally if we were to be thinking about the F6 diminished scale of chords, we get this C sharp diminished in between. Right? But the melody note is B natural. So since we're still in the key of C, let's think about the diminished chord that comes from our C6 diminished scale of chords. And that's a B diminished, right? Okay, so that will lead us back to D minor 7. Great. And then it goes to G7. Okay, so our simplest option, since those are all diatonic melody notes, they're just still in the key of C, we can just keep playing our chords from our C6 diminished scale of chords, right? So we can play, and then that'll take us down to C6 would be the plain chord to choose, right? But what if we wanted to say instead, let's go to G6 and then move it to G diminished to C6. Now that's a nice little movement that we've got. Let's put that phrase together. So now we're thinking, much nicer. Okay? So where are those notes coming from? Okay, so again, we're on G7. F comes from G7, right, or comes from B diminished, if we're thinking that way. And the melody note, though, is C. So we got to think about that as being taken from C6th. So we could, and then watch what's going to happen. These 2 notes play that. Are going to move. Right, we could even play contrary motion, and we're also going to fill in 1 extra note from that diminished chord. So that's real nice. Takes us back to plain old C6th. We're on C7 now, so we're thinking G minor 6th. Okay, now the melody note is A, so we're still thinking G minor 6th, but that A is borrowed from F sharp diminished. So what if we borrow another note? So let's move our E up to F sharp too from that F sharp diminished. So now we're saying, and that resolves down to the plain old G minor 6 notes. And that's real nice, okay? F6, F minor 6. Okay, that top note is a G, so that's a diminished note too. So we could let it be just that one diminished note, or how about if we had two diminished notes there, so now it's like we're saying, and that's very nice. Okay, let's go to C6. And now this next chord is A7. Okay, but it's A7 flat 9. And it's borrowed from the key of D minor. So we've got two ways to think about it. Okay, we could think a D minor 6 scale of chords. That's probably the best thing to think about here. So if we're on C6, and then watch this. Let's just play D minor 6 to A7. That's not quite right, though. Let's start on some A7 notes and just borrow the top voice from that minor chord. That's nice going through the scale. Okay. D minor 7, so just plain old F6. And then when we go to G7, let's play that same movement we did a second ago, where we started with a couple of C6 notes borrowed. Okay, so these two notes are from B diminished, and these two notes are from C6. So we really want to move them down. Although we could also move them in contrary motion and get that nice little movement. Okay, so far we've got okay, we can just keep going on this next A section. Might as well play the same. This time, let's make some different choices on this G7 chord. So instead of just playing straight down again, let's maybe choose, we're going to play our minor 6 on the 5th. So that's D minor 6th. And then we got to find some note to play on this C. So before we played C6 there, let's try playing C diminished instead, since we can always switch those two out. Okay, so we're going to go D minor 6, C diminished. We're going to go to the minor 6 on the flat 2, so that's A flat minor 6. And that's a nice sound. And then we could just go back to D minor 6, but let's think about something different coming from that D minor 6th, but let's borrow the rest of the notes from G diminished, okay? And listen to this. So we're going to have this chord, which is a really pretty chord, okay? So we've got a G7 shell in the left hand, just G and the 7th, F. And then in the right hand, we've got B flat, D flat, E, and A. And that's going to lead into C major 9. Let's listen to that. So D minor 6 over G, C diminished over G, A flat minor 6 over G, and then this chord where it's G diminished except for A, which is coming from D minor 6. And that takes us back to C major 9. Let's use the same little movement to get us into the next little section. But instead of just going back straight to C6, let's borrow a couple of diminished notes. Let's borrow some diminished notes lower in the chord. Okay, that's a really pretty sound, right, of a major 7 sharp 5, just resolving to a major sixth. That's a sound that I've heard Keith Jarrett play on ballads many times, but I never really understood what was going on with it. I just thought, hey, play this major 7 sharp 5 chord, and that was great, but then where do you go with it? So Barry's system really puts it all in context. So let's resolve that. We could even play 3 notes, right? We could say, that's a nice sound too. Let's just use 2 for now. Okay, so that's like saying, and then go into G minor 6 over C again, to F 6th, and then F minor 6th, and then just one more, 1, 6, 2, 5. On this 5 chord, let's play A flat minor 6th, and then lower that E flat to a D to make it a B diminished. So just from our plain old C6 scale of chords, and that'll resolve up to C6. Or if we wanted to do something a little bit more exotic, we could say, check out this chord. Okay, so I've got 2 notes borrowed from C diminished and 2 notes borrowed from B diminished. Okay, so I've got the tonic diminished, or the common tone diminished, and then this is the related or dominant diminished. And we're going to resolve them in contrary motion into a C6th chord. So let me try playing through that whole tune for you, and let's see if I can remember that arrangement. All right, that's about it for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe, like, share with your friends. If you have any questions about anything, leave it in the comments. I also wanted to mention, just right quick, let me see if I can get this in the frame here. I've got a book that I wrote available on Amazon. It's called Chord Tone Improvisation, a practical method for playing on jazz standards, Volume 1, Approaching Major and Minor Triads. So this is just an exhaustive look at playing all sorts of different little bebop approaches, you know, enclosures, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's it for now. See you soon.